In a world where power no longer wears a crown, where authority doesn't reside in castles, but behind screens and strategies, why do some rise and others fade into irrelevance? Why do a few command loyalty without effort, while the rest beg for attention and still get ignored? Today, we decode the secret psychology of the modern king and show you how power is gained, held, and weaponized without ever needing a throne. Once upon a time, power belonged to those who were born into it. A crown passed from father to son, a scepter handed down through bloodlines, and the divine right of kings carved into the very laws of nature. The world accepted this as truth, inevitable, sacred, and immovable. But that world no longer exists. Today, thrones are built, not given. Power is no longer inherited. It is engineered. In the modern world, the bloodline has been replaced by the brand, the castle by the corporation, and the sword by the screen. Influence is no longer conferred by tradition, but by perception. A man who understands how to manipulate the levers of attention, narrative, and authority can rise higher than any monarch of old, and he can do it without ever needing a title. The new king does not need to be born noble. He only needs to make others believe he is. This transformation did not happen overnight. It is the result of a slow collapse of old hierarchies and the rise of new, invisible structures. In a world that worships visibility, status is no longer rooted in land or heritage. It is rooted in control. Control of image, control of voice, control of time. A king in the modern world is a master of architecture, not of buildings, but of minds. To engineer, power is to begin with one fundamental understanding. People follow what they believe is above them. That belief can be rooted in myth, in mystery, or in manipulation. But it must be constructed with intention. A man who walks into a room and is immediately treated with respect has not simply earned that moment. He has engineered it. Every piece of his presence, every word he chooses not to speak, every impression he lets others form is part of a grand design. The modern king does not walk with arrogance. He walks with silence. His power is felt before it is spoken. He enters a room not as a person, but as a symbol. Symbols rule the world, not because they are real, but because they are believed. And belief is the root of all control. When you understand this, you begin to see that the modern path to power is not paved by struggle. It is paved by perception. Engineering power requires the construction of layers. You must build your image not as a reflection, but as a weapon. Who people think you are is more important than who you actually are. The king of today wears masks, not to hide, but to conquer. He knows that a reputation is a crown more valuable than any jewel, encrusted ornament. In a world moving too fast to question what it sees, appearing powerful is as good as being powerful, often better. That does not mean the modern king is fake. It means he is deliberate. He chooses what the world sees, and more importantly, what the world never gets to see. He curates his flaws, silences his weaknesses, and reveals only what serves his rule. This is not deceit. It is survival. Power has always been selective. The difference now is that the stage has expanded and everyone is watching. Technology has democratized influence, but it has not democratized power. In fact, it has made power more subtle, more psychological, more abstract. Today, the man who can command attention with a glance, who can shift public perception with a phrase, who can become an archetype rather than just an individual, that man holds real authority, not because he demands it, but because people cannot help but give it to him. The architecture of modern power is built on silence, mystery, scarcity, and spectacle. The king does not shout. He lets others speak his name. He does not fight. He lets others compete for his approval. He does not chase opportunity. He positions himself so that opportunity is drawn to him like gravity. That is the art. That is the design. When power was inherited, it could be lazy, it could afford mistakes. But the engineered power of today is sharp, calculating, and always watching. It must be, because it exists only as long as it is believed. The modern king must always be building, always reinforcing the myth, always protecting the illusion. One crack in the image, one uncontrolled display of desperation or doubt, and the empire can fall, not because it lacked strength, but because it lost belief. Authority today is less about domination and more about orchestration. The modern world respects those who can orchestrate their presence, their words, their actions like a symphony. Randomness is the death of royalty. A modern king is precise. He speaks with intention. He disappears with timing. He reveals just enough to intrigue and conceals just enough to maintain control. That is what it means to engineer power, to understand that the modern throne is invisible and yet more powerful than any golden seat. The crowd no longer kneels to the bloodline. They kneel to influence, to confidence, to control of the narrative. And most of all, they kneel to the man who understands the value of being above them, without needing to prove it. In a world intoxicated by visibility, where every face is lit by a screen and every moment begs to be captured, many fall into the trap of constant exposure. They believe presence alone creates power. They show up, speak up, post daily, and reveal every detail of their lives, thinking this grants them influence. But the truth is more subtle, more dangerous, and infinitely more strategic. In the game of power, visibility is indeed a weapon, but so is mystery. And the true king is a master of both. To be seen is necessary. To be known too well is fatal. The modern world respects presence but worships restraint. A king must understand that people do not admire what they fully understand. They admire what they can't quite define. Mystery is the mother of reverence. It is the silence behind the throne that gives the throne its aura. If you are always available, always visible, always talking, you leave no room for imagination. And power without imagination is just another form of noise. Visibility used recklessly becomes weakness. If your face is seen too often, if your voice is heard too frequently, you become ordinary. The modern crowd is addicted to novelty. Their attention is short, and their loyalty is even shorter. The more they see you, the less they need you. This is the paradox the powerful understand. That attention must be managed like a scarce resource, not a flood. Flood the market with yourself, and you devalue your own currency. The modern king does not post every thought, share every moment, or respond to every call. He appears rarely but with purpose. He does not compete for attention, he draws it. And the reason people look toward him is not because he begs to be seen, but because his absence creates hunger. His silence becomes a riddle. His occasional appearances become events. He becomes the exception, not the rule. And in a world that consumes constantly, the exception is priceless. There is an art to being seen. It is not simply about showing up. It is about knowing when to vanish. The disappearance of the king is not his downfall. It is his elevation. It allows his presence to ferment in the minds of the people. It gives space for myth to grow, for stories to circulate, for reverence to take root. While others overexpose themselves and burn out like cheap candles, the king becomes a constellation, visible enough to guide, distant enough to inspire. Mystery is not created by doing nothing. It is created by choosing what not to do. The king does not answer every question. He does not clarify every detail. He does not explain every decision. The less you say, the more weight your words carry. The less you reveal, the more people speculate. Speculation is a powerful tool because it engages the imagination of your audience. When people begin to imagine who you are, they begin to participate in your myth. And once they've invested their own imagination in you, they become loyal, not to you, but to the image they created of you. That is unbreakable control. Even in ancient times, rulers built walls not just for protection, but to create distance. Not all walls were made of stone. Some were made of silence. The same applies today. The walls are digital now, but the effect is the same. A man who is not constantly reachable, who maintains his own time and space, is perceived as valuable. His time becomes a throne room. His replies become decrees. His face, when it appears, becomes a symbol of decision, not desperation. Visibility can be manipulated. The modern king understands that you do not have to be truly powerful. You only have to appear to be beyond reach. This is why many in power surround themselves with layers of assistance, of teams, of delays. Not because they are too busy, but because delay creates anticipation, and anticipation is a form of power. If you are always ready to respond, you become part of the crowd. If people must wait for you, they rise to meet your level. There is also a strategic dimension to mystery in leadership. When your next move is unknown, your enemies cannot prepare. When your boundaries are unclear, your influence spreads further. When your intentions are hidden, your power becomes a storm in the distance, felt, feared, but never quite understood. And what is not understood cannot be challenged directly. This vagueness becomes armor. It confuses threats and disorients rivals. It creates an aura around the king that makes attack feel dangerous, even suicidal. But mystery is not the absence of presence. It is presence shaped with purpose. The king chooses when to appear, how to appear, and in what form. Each appearance must communicate something greater than words. Confidence without arrogance, distance without disdain, calm without weakness. His movements are intentional, his gestures measured, his timing flawless. He is never early, never late. He arrives exactly when the crowd has begun to wonder where he is. And when he leaves, he exits not with noise, but with silence that lingers longer than applause. The game of power, especially in the modern world, is not about being everywhere. It is about being unforgettable. Visibility without impact is a trick played by the powerless. But the powerful understand that every appearance must plant a seed. Not of information, but of influence. Not of familiarity, but of fascination. They let others overshare, overexpose, overextend. Meanwhile, the king remains distant enough to be desired, close enough to be real, and elusive enough to be legendary. In the court of power, emotion is not a luxury, it is a liability. While the common man believes that honesty and vulnerability are virtues, the one who seeks power must learn a harsher truth. To lead, one must feel deeply, but reveal nothing. Emotion, when displayed openly, is not interpreted as humanity. It is interpreted as instability. The modern king must master his inner storms and appear as a force untouched by chaos. A single crack of visible insecurity can shatter the illusion of authority built over years. In the world of power, emotion is treason. The illusion of control is often more important than control itself. To the masses, the king must appear calm amidst fire, unmoved in crisis, and untouched by drama. This does not mean he lacks feelings. It means he is not ruled by them. He processes in private, decides in silence, and acts with cold logic. He never allows his inner turmoil to leak into the public eye. For once the crowd sees the king bleed, they realize he is not divine, not untouchable, and therefore not worth their fear. The modern world has confused emotional openness with strength, but what they call authenticity often becomes ammunition. Enemies do not need you to fall, they only need you to flinch. The moment you show frustration, they know where to poke. The moment you react, they know you can be provoked. A king must be a mirror. He reflects what others bring to him, but adds nothing of his own emotion to the scene. He observes, calculates, and strikes only when the outcome has been predetermined. Those who lead with emotion often believe they are building connection. What they fail to understand is that power is not built on sympathy. It is built on certainty. People follow leaders who make them feel safe, who appear in control when the world spins out. When you break down in front of your followers, you transfer your chaos to them. You poison their faith in your ability to lead. Loyalty fades not because you failed, but because you appeared unsure. Doubt is contagious, and the king cannot afford to spread it. In every room, people look for signals: who commands attention, who remains composed under pressure, who speaks last and speaks least. The king is not the one who cries the loudest. He is the one who listens with an unreadable gaze. When chaos erupts, others panic, others yell, others scramble. The king remains still. That stillness, that refusal to match the hysteria of the moment, is what defines him. It separates him from the emotional mess of the crowd. Emotion also blinds judgment. Decisions made in anger, fear, or desperation rarely serve the throne. They serve the ego, but the king is not a slave to his ego. He lets logic lead. When insulted, he does not retaliate immediately. When challenged, he does not erupt. He watches. He gathers information. He plays the long game. Retaliation comes only when it sends a message, not just to the enemy, but to everyone watching. Every action is part of the theater. There is no room for emotional improvisation. In relationships, too, the king must navigate with clarity. He may feel attraction, affection, even love, but he does not lose himself in it. Love, unchecked, is as dangerous as hatred. The modern king does not beg for affection. He does not plead for validation. He understands that once emotion governs his actions, he becomes predictable, and once he is predictable, he becomes vulnerable. He gives, but always with purpose. He cares, but never more than he commands. To be emotionally disciplined is not to be cold. It is to be in control. The king can show kindness, but only when it serves a strategic end. He can show disappointment, but only when it teaches a lesson. Even his rare displays of anger must be measured, theatrical, and final. He does not explode in rage. He uses anger like a blade, clean and sharp. When he speaks from emotion, it is because he chose to, not because he lost control. In public conflict, emotion is especially fatal. A king who defends himself emotionally appears insecure. A king who justifies his actions with feelings looks weak. The powerful do not explain, they act. They let others debate their motives while they move in silence. By the time others have interpreted their intentions, the outcome has already been sealed. Emotional neutrality becomes a kind of weapon. When others scream, the king whispers. When others beg, the king remains silent. His detachment disarms. His composure intimidates. He becomes unreadable, unshakable, and therefore unchallengeable. The crowd may not understand him, but they will obey. The court may not love him, but they will not dare cross him. Because in a world where everyone is ruled by emotion, the man who is not becomes king by default. Even in defeat, emotion must be concealed. When plans fall apart, when allies betray, when isolation closes in, the king does not crumble. He does not vent. He does not broadcast his suffering for sympathy. He endures in silence, rebuilds in shadow, and returns with precision. The world only sees him when he is whole again, stronger than before, colder than before. Weakness is not hidden, it is erased. The king's power is preserved not by the absence of emotion, but by the mastery of it. His heart may feel, but his face never reveals. His mind may rage, but his hand remains steady. He is never led by reaction. He leads with resolve. The crowd, the court, and the enemies may cry, scream, and tremble, but the king simply watches. And that silence, that restraint, that merciless calm in the middle of fire, is what makes him feared, followed, and ultimately remembered. Power has always rested on perception, but in the modern world, perception is no longer just a tool. It is the battlefield itself. Armies still exist, but they are slower than stories. Weapons still strike, but none as swiftly as a rumor. In this new kingdom, the one who commands the narrative does not need to prove his strength. He merely needs to dictate how others see it. To control the narrative is to control the way reality is experienced, interpreted, and obeyed. And the man who controls what others believe ultimately controls what others do. In ancient times, a king's power came from the land he owned or the bloodline he carried. Today, that bloodline is replaced by belief, and belief is shaped not by truth, but by repetition, framing, and emotional appeal. The one who crafts the story first plants the seed of truth in the mind of the people. It doesn't matter if it's entirely accurate. What matters is that it is memorable, easy to repeat, and emotionally resonant. Once accepted, a false narrative becomes harder to dislodge than the truth ever was. This is why the king must not simply act. He must define how his actions are interpreted. Every move you make will be seen. The question is, who controls the lens? The king never lets others define him. He speaks before they speculate. He offers meaning before others can assign it. If he is silent, it is not because he is absent. It is because his silence is part of a larger message. To act and then explain is to be defensive. But to shape the story before it unfolds is to be untouchable. This is why the king is not reactive. He is a narrator in his own theater, and everyone else merely plays a part. To control the narrative, you must first understand its architecture. A narrative is not simply a message. It is an emotional path. It makes people feel something before it makes them think. And in that emotion lies its power. People do not act on reason. They act on what resonates. A king weaves his values, his triumphs, even his flaws into a story that justifies his position. He is not seen as lucky. He is seen as chosen, not as a man who won, but as a man who was always destined to win. The best narrative is not just accepted. It feels inevitable. This control must extend beyond words. Actions alone do not speak louder than words. They speak loudly only when framed correctly. A gesture of mercy, when presented as a sign of wisdom, elevates the king's legend. The same act, twisted by another into weakness, can ruin him. This is why the king must not simply act with precision, but ensure that every action is accompanied by interpretation. In today's world, no act exists in a vacuum. If you do not tell the world what it means, they will decide for themselves, and they will not be kind. Enemies will always seek to twist your intentions. Their goal is not to defeat you in battle, but to corrupt your image in the minds of the people. Once your reputation is poisoned, even truth cannot save you. This is why narrative warfare is more dangerous than physical warfare. It does not attack your body, but your essence. The king defends himself not with shields, but with stories that protect and reinforce his identity. He keeps his message consistent, his myth alive, and his authority untouchable. Even when facts are against him, the perception he has built becomes a shield stronger than steel. But narrative control is not just about defense. It is also a form of attack. When the king seeks to weaken a rival, he does not need to strike directly. He only needs to plant an idea, a whisper, a doubt, a suggestion of corruption, a question left unanswered. Once suspicion takes root in the minds of the people, reality bends around it. The enemy may deny it, may protest, may rage, but the more he speaks, the more he fuels the fire. The king, meanwhile, remains silent, dignified, elevated. The contrast destroys the opponent long before any confrontation. The most dangerous rival is the one who controls the public's imagination. And so the king must always occupy that space first, not by giving more information, but by crafting better illusion. In the age of endless data, it is not facts that rule, it is the framework. He who frames the facts frames the fate of all who live by them. A modern king is not the loudest voice, but the most strategic one. He does not flood the world with messages. He drops symbols, phrases, moments that ripple into belief. Symbols are essential. A single image, a gesture, a repeated phrase becomes a seed for myth. Over time, it becomes an anchor in the minds of followers. The king chooses these carefully. His clothing, his posture, his tone, all communicate even when he is silent. The people do not follow policies, they follow presence. The presence is defined by narrative, and the narrative is sculpted in advance, reinforced over time, never left to chance. Control of the narrative also requires control of absence. Sometimes what is not said, not explained, not clarified, speaks loudest. The king understands that ambiguity is often more powerful than clarity. When people are unsure of your intentions, they watch you more closely. When they wonder what you'll do next, you stay at the center of their thoughts. That is a form of rule. To be inside their mind before you even act is a form of invisible domination. In the modern world, the crown is not made of gold. It is made of attention. And attention does not flow to the deserving, it flows to the most well-positioned. Positioning comes not from truth, but from framing. If the king falls, it is not because his ideas were wrong. It is because someone else told a better story. And if he rises, it is not because he was the strongest. It is because the world believed he was. The difference between fiction and fact no longer matters. The only thing that matters is who got there first, who said it loudest, and who made it stick. Power in the modern world no longer relies on brute force or blatant commands. The age of overt tyranny has faded, replaced by a more elegant and insidious form of domination, control that wears the mask of freedom. The greatest rulers today are not those who restrict choice, but those who design it. The illusion of choice is the most effective tool of control because it makes the subject believe he is free, while every step he takes leads precisely where the king intended. In this carefully constructed maze, rebellion feels like participation, and submission feels like independence. To manipulate choice is to shape desire. People do not act out of pure will. They act according to the options placed before them. And the one who designs those options silently shapes the future. A man believes he is making his own decisions, but every path he takes has been calculated. This is the highest form of power, not to be obeyed, but to make obedience feel like agency. When people think they are choosing freely, they lower their guard. They no longer resist. They no longer question. They follow, thinking they are leading themselves. The modern king understands that people crave freedom, but fear responsibility. They want to feel in control, yet they do not want to face the uncertainty of total autonomy. So he gives them choices, but only between outcomes that serve his interest. He lets them argue between illusion A and illusion B, both of which ultimately lead back to his desired conclusion. In doing so, he transforms control into a gift. They thank him for what enslaves them. They defend what confines them. They feel powerful while being gently guided. This is not deception. It is psychological architecture. Just as a master builder designs a palace with invisible symmetry, the king builds social systems with invisible limits. He shapes opinion through trends, guides behavior through incentives, and restricts rebellion through comfort. Rebellion becomes exhausting, resistance becomes impractical, the people stop asking what they really want and instead choose from what they are given. And once the mind accepts the menu as reality, freedom becomes irrelevant. The illusion of choice is reinforced by abundance. Flood people with options, and they become distracted. They confuse movement with progress. They believe complexity equals freedom. Meanwhile, the king only needs to ensure that the structure remains intact. No matter how wildly they move within the cage, they never touch its walls. The king, like a magician, shows them the hand while hiding the trick. Every debate they engage in, every product they buy, every lifestyle they adopt has been prepared for them long in advance. This form of control does not provoke revolt because it does not feel like control. It feels like expression. When people believe their choices reflect their identity, they become emotionally invested in the very system that enslaves them. They defend the narrative not because it is true, but because it feels like theirs. And the king, unseen and unmentioned, remains the author behind the curtain, guiding the plot without appearing in the credits. To apply this power in personal strategy, the king offers others opportunities, not commands. He never forces, he tempts, he never demands loyalty. He offers paths where loyalty is the most appealing route. He knows that when people choose to serve, they do so with pride, and pride blinds them more deeply than fear ever could. Pride turns a servant into a defender of the throne. It makes obedience feel noble, even heroic. In conversations, negotiations, and influence, the modern king does not say, "Do this." He says, "You are free to choose," but the timing, the tone, and the context of his suggestion ensure that there is only one rational path. He creates environments where the desired action becomes the natural action. People will say yes not because they were convinced, but because they cannot imagine saying no. The decision becomes obvious, logical, inevitable. And yet, they will believe it was their own. Even when power is most present, it remains invisible. The king avoids confrontation. He does not need to impose his will. He needs only to limit the will of others within carefully shaped parameters. When everyone is given a title, a platform, a sense of significance, they stop looking for who truly holds the reins. They confuse attention for authority, voice for power, and so the king gives them their moment to shine, knowing that none of it threatens his rule. Entertainment, identity, ideology, these are tools of the illusion. Let people feel entertained, and they won't ask real questions. Let them define themselves through external symbols, and they'll never see the puppeteer behind the stage. Let them feel morally righteous, and they'll enforce their own chains. The king becomes the architect of the system they live in, and the people themselves become its guardians. Power perpetuates itself through invisible hands. To wield this kind of power, the king must remain subtle. He does not argue, he frames. He does not dictate, he shapes the environment. He does not silence voices, he amplifies distractions. While others fight over scraps of control, he holds the blueprint. He understands that whoever designs the arena no longer needs to fight in it. The players may be louder, but the designer always wins. The illusion of choice is perfected when resistance is preemptively absorbed into the system itself. Let people protest, so long as the protest remains within safe boundaries. Let them vote, speak, scream, so long as their actions never threaten the deeper structure. The king, by allowing noise, gives the impression of freedom. But true freedom is not in the shouting, it is in the shaping, and he who shapes the path shapes the outcome. Mastering this principle allows the king to avoid the messiness of direct control. There are no uprisings against a ruler no one sees. There is no rebellion against a structure people believe they built themselves. The highest power is not to lead the people, but to program their choices, frame their limits, and cloak domination as independence. The world may look free, but it walks exactly where the king wants it to go. Power in the modern world no longer announces itself with crowns or armies. It moves in silence, shapes perception, and governs through invisible strings. The king of today is not born. He is crafted through cold logic, mastery of presence, and the ruthless manipulation of what others believe to be real. He does not chase approval, he commands attention. He does not beg for loyalty, he engineers it. While others exhaust themselves in noise, he rules through restraint. While the world obsesses over being seen, he remains just out of reach, remembered and revered. His silence speaks, his mystery dominates, his story defines reality itself. And as the crowd argues over the illusion of freedom, the king watches from above, unmoved, undisputed, and utterly in control.